All right, let's just dive right into this explainer and build a literal blueprint of human reality. Today, we're exploring exactly how we process the world around us. It's a seriously fascinating look at what the source text calls the architecture of knowing and being. I mean, think about it. We spend our entire lives gathering facts, having these rich experiences, and interacting with other people. But how often do we actually step back to look at the structural framework of how all those different modes of understanding fit together? Well, that's exactly what we're going to do today.
So, right out of the gate, we're faced with this core tension. Consider the purely objective description of a sound wave. Maybe it's a dense mathematical formula or a physics diagram. Now, contrast that with the deeply subjective, visceral experience of actually listening to your favorite song. This perfectly highlights the profound difference between the map we use to describe the world and the actual lived territory we exist in. Both are absolutely real, but they represent entirely different ways of encountering reality.
Here is the architectural blueprint for our explainer today. We're going to cover 1. Two perspectives on reality. 2. The axis of knowing. 3. The axis of being. 4. Language meets awareness. And finally, 5. Knowledge versus lived wisdom. Let's get into it. Starting with Section 1. Two perspectives on reality and how we actually encounter the world. The whole foundation of this source material boils down to a really fascinating premise. Human beings encounter reality through more than one mode of understanding. We aren't just cold logic machines, right? But we also aren't just chaotic bundles of emotion. So the crucial takeaway here is that our minds operate along two complementary axes, anchored by two totally different questions. How can reality be known is a question that pulls us outward toward facts and measurements. But on the flip side, how is reality lived pulls us inward toward meaning and presence.
Moving right along to Section 2, the axis of knowing, basically the outside looking in.
The source defines this axis through what it calls the third-person perspective. This is all about observing reality from the outside as a he, she, it, or they. It's an attempt to completely step back, detach from the object you're looking at, and examine it systematically. This perspective is quite literally the foundation of modern science. Because think about it. The gravity that makes an object fall or the chemical makeup of a glass of water doesn't change depending on who is measuring it or whether that scientist has had their morning coffee yet. It seeks knowledge that is entirely independent of the observer. And you can see this beautiful progression happen. It starts with science discovering patterns out there in the wild through observation. But observation alone isn't really enough, is it? We need language to bridge the gap, taking a private observation and turning it into shared public knowledge. Then, finally, we push into mathematics to formalize those patterns, abstracting something like a falling object into a set of universal equations. We move from observing phenomena to naming them, to finally turning them into pure formal logic. But here's the catch, and it's a big one. As powerful as this third-person perspective is, it hits a really hard boundary. A mathematical model of reality is just not reality itself. A representation should never be confused with actual presence. Reading a dense neurological description of pain in a medical textbook, yeah, that is absolutely not the same thing as the visceral, lived experience of actually suffering.
Which brings us to Section 3, the axis of being. This is the inside looking out.
This axis brings us progressively closer to our actual lived experience. Instead of pointing at a rock and asking, what is this object? This axis asks, what does it actually mean to exist? We're shifting away from the clinical, it, to you, and finally all the way to I. We move through existentialism into awareness and arrive at phenomenology. Let's break down how this builds. First up on this axis is existentialism, or the second-person perspective. The source emphasizes a crucial point here. We are active participants in life. We're not just detached observers sitting in a laboratory taking notes. We don't form our identities in a vacuum. You really only discover who you truly are when you encounter the other. Your identity develops through recognition, cooperation, shared language, intimacy, and yes, even conflict. Existence isn't just you sitting alone in a room. It is fundamentally being with others. And that leads us directly into phenomenology, the first-person perspective. Now, this doesn't investigate what exists independently out in the universe, but rather how things actually show up in your lived experience. Subjectivity isn't just some passive, empty box inside your head. It's incredibly relational. For example, a tree isn't just a physical object made of carbon. It appears to you as beautiful or maybe threatening or useful or even sacred. The world we experience is always a deeply meaningful world, and phenomenology studies exactly how that meaning arises for the I. All right, Section 4, Language Meets Awareness, the collision. This brings us to a huge, absolutely vital question. What actually happens when the map meets the territory? What goes down at this threshold where the objective, descriptive knowledge of that first axis collides head-on with the subjective, lived awareness of the second axis? The answer lies in this gorgeous realization from the text. Language gives experience form. Awareness gives experience presence. Just let that sink in for a second. Language belongs to the axis of knowing, right? It creates the map, it classifies things, and it lets us ask, what can I say about this experience? But awareness belongs to the axis of being. It actively anchors us back to the territory, asking, what is this experience actually like right now in this exact moment? So, language awareness is kind of this ultimate central threshold between the world we describe and the world we actually live in. They meet perfectly in the middle, because without language, our experiences remain entirely private, locked inside our own heads, completely unshared. But without awareness, our language is just a bunch of empty concepts and dry maps. Working together, they ensure we don't just possess these abstract theories, but rather a really profound, present, and communicable understanding of our lives. And finally, Section 5, Knowledge versus Lived Wisdom, the ultimate goal. The text makes such a great distinction here. You could know literally everything there is to know about the chemistry of love, the oxytocin receptors, the exact neurological firing patterns, but that is a completely different ballpark from actually knowing how to love another human being. The source points out that someone might understand the absolute cutting-edge neuroscience of meditation without ever actually becoming an attentive person. A whole civilization can possess mind-blowing technological knowledge, yet remain totally lost when it comes to meaning if they lack lived wisdom. Wisdom only happens when what you know and how you are truly integrated. If we bring all this together, you can see how these three perspectives line up perfectly. The third-person perspective focuses on science and asks, what is the world? The second-person perspective zeroes in on relationships, asking, who are we? And the first person hones in on awareness, asking, what is it like? This illustrates beautifully that you do not have to choose between them. They aren't fighting each other. They're complementary ways to experience a much richer, much more holistic reality. The whole point of this architecture isn't to force you to pick a side between objective science and subjective experience. Instead, the fully integrated movement of human understanding requires us to do all three things. We need to know the world as an observer, actively engage with others as a participant, and deeply experience our own selves as an aware subject. So, I'm going to leave you with this final massive challenge from the source material. It dares you to take the maps you spent your life collecting and actually step out into the territory they describe. How does what you know actually transform how you live? Because until you make that leap from collecting facts to truly living them out, all you've got is a blueprint. The rest is entirely up to you to build.